In a series of interviews sponsored by the Kangaroo Island sub-branch of the RSL, we interview one of our small group of surviving World War II veterans. Frank Warner has been a respected member of the Penneshaw community for now on 50 years. It's a real privilege, Frank, talking to you as a veteran, one of our few veterans of World War II. You are an Englishman, born and bred, and we were just wondering if you could give us some ideas and talk about your youth.
Yes, well, my youth, of course, I was born in 1926. I was just a youngster at the time of the war starting, and you don't know much about things then. But I went to school, an ordinary school, and in England there's a whole city examination at about 11 years of age for every boy and girl at the ordinary schools. And the idea of that was to see who would be going to a secondary school or whatever, or stay in ordinary school. And I won a scholarship for that, which was allowed to go to the grammar school. They took 30 a year, a full team a year, and so it went on. That meant we were then going to school till 16 instead of 14, the normal school leaving. However, my father worked on the railways, and when I was 14, he was transferred to Carlisle, up in the north of England. That was from Blackburn in the Midlands. And the point was that they would transfer my to a secondary school in Carlisle if it was required. But I was turned 14. The only person I knew in Carlisle, as we'd lived there before, was a friend who had left school at 14 and actually was working at a job. And I persuaded my parents that I didn't want to go to the secondary school not knowing anybody, and I could go there, I had a friend, and I could get a job myself. So eventually they realised that it was going to be difficult or whatever, and that happened. And I got a job then at 14, and that kept going. Eventually I worked at the government swimming pools at Bath, which are regular in cities in England. But all you know about by then is that the war's on. Nobody knows when it's going to finish. And I know that I'll get an invitation when you're 18 to go in, because it's compulsory conscription. It bases your thought on not what you're going to do in life, but what you're going to have to do. I was keen, I suppose. I tried to join as a boy in the Navy when I was 16, but a recruiting officer who was a chief petty officer, regular in the war, but a retired man, and they brought those people back into their jobs to do things like recruiting. He persuaded me because of the money situation and other things, and he questioned whether I'd told my parents I was going there, and my reply was, well, I'm going to tell them when I go back. But they gave me an examination and said, well, you'll pass an examination, but I suggest that you wait until they're at least 17, and then you'll be too old to go in as a boy, you'll be old enough to go in as a man, and you'll get a man's wages instead of a boy's wages until you're 18. So I was persuaded then by him and my parents to wait for another while and go in. So I went back when I was 17. I volunteered then, was accepted, enlisted. That was a while. That was in Carlisle and Cumberland, and I enlisted on the 29th of March, 1944. Passed the doings, and within a week or so after doing the examination, I got a letter from the government together with documents and a travel warrant to report to a camp on the eastern side of England, down in the south, a place that used to be one of Butlins holidays camps, but had been taken over by the Navy as a place to be, where people joined, did their initial training, marching, of course, a lot of that, and small arms training for the fact that you would need before you were transferred elsewhere, which was to Portsmouth. That was the naval division I then belonged to, and travelled to Portsmouth to the barracks there, and of course a big place for. I'd been subject to a lot of bombing there, but the barracks we were at was free of bombing at that stage, and you just do some relieving work there. But after being there, it was a case of awaiting transfer to an active position, which came in a short time to a ship called the Plover, the name of the same as the name of the bird, which was a mine-laying vessel. That was sea mines, of course, and the word was that it had originally been a vessel that was at the head of the Navy's submarine laying group, but had been refitted out to make it fit for active service, and that meant that it was fitted out such that it took 100 sea mines for every time it was loaded. And that's a lot of mines. The bigger ships that mine laid carried somewhere about 90, but this smaller boat was taking 100 mines every trip. Simply, the trips were that, well, as you go, you lay a minefield somewhere, and your navigator has got it all planned out. They've taken the depth of the water to the base, so they can set the mines at a certain depth under the water, to whether they're for ordinary ships or for submarines, which are, of course, lower in the water than you need for ordinary ships. And while I was on that ship, the only mines we were laying were anti-submarine mines around the English coast, north of England, where the convoys from America were likely to come in, and U-boats were looking for them, of course. And then also they still had a lot of the France and so on over on across from the Channel was all in the Nazi occupation, and their troops were there. And of course, the subs were able to go into what ports there were there. So it was a case of laying mines in different places, the north, around those ports, where English ships were going, convoys and so on, and the kind of thing placed where submarines were looking for ships to sink. And that went on for such a considerable time until the war finished.
Yeah, well, in 1944, when you enlisted then in the Navy, Frank,
Yes.
it was a time when Germany was actually actively trying to, Operation Sea Lion, I think it was called, where they were going to invade the invasion of England by the Germans, and you would have been very active laying the mines around the Channel and the coast of England,
Yes,
in preparation for that invasion
That's
by the Germans.
it was a question of who was going to invade who. And of course, in the services like that, you don't get told all the inside things about it. Everything's top secret. You're not allowed to talk about anything in the war or what you're doing really outside, and you just go on and do as you're told. The trips were constant, and it was filled with hard work. It was a small ship, you see. It was about 90 ships company, and because of the work, you were working in 2 watches. That's 4 on and 4 off. And you'd always get the 4 on your duty, but you didn't always get the 4 off. You were doing other things that you had to do as well.
Well, the war in Europe came to an end not long after your service. You then were discharged from the Navy?
Well, not at that time. After the First World War, some of the German ships and skippers had not surrendered as they should have done. They were vindictive enough. They wanted to go and do some damage before they were sunk themselves or taken in themselves. And they did sink a few British ships after the war had been signed. And they had to be sunk too. Now, after the Second War, the Navy gave us this message about it, that we were going to be standing by just in case. So we were out in the anchorage in the port, awaiting any question of whether we were needed. And at that time, of course, the idea was that after the war, the first men that had gone into it would be demobilised first. So it was being done gradually, and we were some of the last that had gone in, so we were going to take some time. And typical of things when they wanted, there was less need for telegraphists on a lot of the areas then, just this standby. And they were short of people in the supply section, that's the stores and things. So they asked for volunteers to change from the telegraphist, which was bell-bottom uniform, to the supplied uniform, which was jacket and trousers uniform. And they asked for volunteers, and it was typical of the services, and that's you, and you. Now falling outside. And that's the standard kind of thing about it. And we were transferred to the Nelson, the battleship, which was standing by in another port down Plymouth way. And that's the big ship that was standing by in case there were others. And that lasted for 3 months or so, I suppose. And we got another offer of volunteering, and that was to stay on the Nelson and go with it to the Middle East and Far East on a tourism thing, a victory tour. And it sounded very attractive. But of course, the other message came out is, what will happen, of course, is some of the fellas out there with the first in, and you'll be transferred off the Nelson and put ashore there, and they'll be taken home to be demobilised, and you'll have to wait out here. By that time, my answer was, well, I'm not volunteering for anything now. I'm just waiting till I can get out and be demobilised. So they didn't send us on the Nelson, transferred us to a barracks. And we were in the barracks just doing barracks work until we got demobilised.
What recognitions did you receive from your service in the Navy during the World War II, Frank?
Well, I got two medals. That was the standard thing. There was the war medal. That was the 1939-45. That was the war you'd been in, and everybody that'd been in it got that. And then the other medal was the France and Germany medal, because that was to indicate which area you'd worked in mainly. And we were on the Plover mainly. While I was on it, in that area, we laid mines south of the Irish island where the difference was. And they had been doing a lot in the north coast, where the members that had done that also got a medal for Pacific area. But they'd done, I think, a lot of trips in that area before we went on the Plover. So we'd done a couple of trips less than the others, but we didn't get that medal. But they were the standard medals for the work we've been doing.
Well, on your discharge, what activities did you do involved in after your discharge?
Well, after discharge, I went back to Carlisle and went back working for the government, the state government, at the swimming pools again, because I'd done a lot of swimming and was classed as a reasonably good swimmer, and that was the job that I stayed in for quite some time, but until I thought about going to Australia. That was done on a Sunday. The things that blokes like me would have done single on Friday on a Sunday would be go down to the local pub about 10 o'clock in the morning to have a couple of beers with your mates. As long as you got home by 12:30, because your mother was the cook, and Sunday lunch was always a roast midday, and you had to be there for that. And then reading the Sunday paper, I saw an article and an advert in it for, they were looking for people to come to Australia as migrants, and it was all very well done, so and you go to Australia, your fare will be free apart from a sum of $10 to help to pay and record you, and you had to stay in Australia for 2 years at least and work during that time. And if you left and came back, you would have to pay the balance of your fare over from the $10. And I thought about that for a while and realised I didn't know anything at all about Australia. They hadn't even taught those things in school about. So I dropped a note to them saying I'd seen their advert and so on, and I'd be pleased if they could send me some material about Australia generally and what kind of work there is and so on. Well, whilst they were well enough with their advert, I got a letter from them in reply saying, yes, we have your letter, all that, and we have a member of our people who'll be visiting your city on such and such a date, and he's doing the recruiting for this business, and he'll give you an appointment. He'll write to you and give you an appointment before he gets there. So I was given a letter with an appointment time in about a month later, or 2 or 3 weeks anyway. That my interest was a bit wavery, I suppose. I wasn't thinking a lot about it, and I forgot to go to that interview, which was, and I got a message to tell me that and they could give me another date for an interview if I wanted it. So I said, yes, I'm sorry I missed that. I will take one. So they sent a message back and gave me another interview, and that was in a shorter time. It was only about a fortnight away. And I had to leave my work and go up to where it was in this place like this in the city. And I didn't forget that one really. It's just that I had a bit of difficulty getting away from work. But anyway, I got there and apologised to the fellow for being later than he'd expected me. He said, well, that's all right, he said, but I won't be able to spend a lot of time with you now because I've got to catch a train back to London. But this is what the score is. And the main thing is you'll have to have a job before you can go any further, medicals or anything. He said, you need to be sponsored and have a job. I said, well, you know, what kind of work was a bloke like me do? And where do you live in? Where does a single bloke live in Australia? Here, you know, we board somewhere or stay home and so on. But I've no idea what it'd be. He said, oh, wait a minute. He said, no, what sort of work are you doing? Yes, all right. No, he said, let's see what they want for. What part would you want to go? I said, well, I don't know anything about it. I've looked at a map, and Adelaide is the middle city of the centre of the place. So I'd go there. And if you could let me know something about that area. And he said, oh, wait a minute, yes, oh, just a minute. No, he said, the fire service and the police force in Carlisle, in Australia, South Australia, are looking for people to work. They want people to be in the fire service. So, no, he said the police force there have got a barracks right in the city, and that's where they would live when they join. So, which would you want to do, fire or police work? I said, well, what about the fire? They don't have barracks, he said. They have houses around the place. I said, oh, well, I'll take the police work then. Not knowing anything about it. And it was only a 2-year commitment work, And then he said, well, you don't really have to go to this work. If you didn't go, as long as you find another job and work somewhere else, that's acceptable here in B. So I left that as volunteered, and it'll be in due course. And that was it. But only a couple of weeks or so after that, I got another letter saying, we have some cancellations from a boat that's leaving Australia on such and such a date, and there's room for some single people, and you could have one of those bunks if you would like to go. I said, well, yeah. I still hadn't got any papers that they sent me to tell me about Australia, and I thought about it. Oh well, yes, I'll go. I'll give it a go. And that's it. And I replied to them that I would go. I'd take that, and I had to send the $10 in to finalise that. I did that, and then I contacted my brother, who was still in the army from after the war. He was older than me, and he was still in the army, and let him know that I will be down in London from Carlisle on such and such a date. And then chance of seeing him before I went. But that worked out, actually. He got into London the day after we set sail. He got some leave, but it was too late, and that's it. I came on. We had a good holiday on the boat, so 4 weeks coming over, and it wasn't a big ship.
Well, you arrived in Adelaide and you were accommodated at the police barracks.
There was a commissioned officer there to meet me off the boat, which I thought was good organisation. He took me down to the police barracks and took me into the orderly room and said, look after this fellow, he's joined the police force, give him a room and organise him for barracks work. And then he told me what day would be going to the headquarters of the police department to sign on and be sworn in. And that happened within a few days of landing here.
Where was your first postings in the South Australian Police Force?
The first posting was after you'd done your training there. Was we were still in barracks, and you did a bit of relieving until they could find somewhere for you to go. And I was sent to Renmark. That's relieving people who are off sick or on leave. And I did a month or two in Renmark. I did somewhere else on the river, so on. And then I got my first main posting was to Tanunda, sergeant and one-man police station there, and the one man had been transferred to another station on regular transfers, which was the way in the police force in that time. You'd stay 3-4 years somewhere, and then you get moved to another place. That's in the country police. You had a choice. We had a choice, I didn't mention, of going in the mounted cadre or in the city police or the country police. They were all the same police force, but different avenues. Well, I'd never been on a horse in my life, and they said, that doesn't matter, we'll train you. No thanks, no. No, I'm not really a horsey man. I'll wait on the time, and I'll go in the country police. The idea of that was, well, that'll be able to see around the country a bit more for the police force than I would in just the city. So I was fortunate to get a place like Tanunda as my first.
You had a life-changing experience in your term in Tanunda where you met your future wife. Would you be able to tell us the circumstances relating to your meeting up with your future wife, Sylvia?
Yes, I was single, of course, and in Tanunda, and generally one thing and another. I met by going to the RSL meeting, which they had once a month, and although it was known as the German background thing, they weren't Nazis, and they had a very high recruitment from that area, and it was always quite a lot would be going to the RSL meetings. And I met these people that said, oh, my sister's over in England now, knowing I was from England. She'd gone over there with 3 or 4 other girls to do a working holiday in England, tour the continent and so on. That's what girls of that age did at that time. So I'd been there in Tanunda a couple of years or so when by the time I knew some of her brothers and some of her family, because there were other members of that family still living there. And it so happened that I heard that I was told by some of these people, oh yes, our sister's coming home from England now. Well, you'll meet her when she gets here. I thought, all right. And then one day I was doing a foot patrol of the street, and in those days in country towns, once you were known, you used to walk around the town generally in ordinary plain clothes. And that's what I was doing. I was just walking along the main street. And this lady was coming towards me, and I would do, you're on duty, we're going past, you'd just touch your cap and say good day, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is to any people that were there. I'd never seen this girl before, but didn't matter. And she stopped, and she said, "Oh," she said, "you must be the pommy bastard that's come here to be an Australian policeman." And I said, "Yes, that's right." And that was the first meeting point. But we had a chat, and I learned that she'd been in the WAFs, in the services in Australia, and it was a holiday. And I met her for some time at Tanunda, because I was there after that for a while, and eventually took her out somewhere. And I'd been invited to her home because of her brothers and so on, and had been invited there. I had quarters at the police station, which was just a bed-sitting room, a large bed-sitting room, with an ablution block wooden iron put on the back of the house that the sergeant lived in, which was a big house. And we were the police station used the court offices just alongside. So that was it. And it was very pleasant there. I had somewhere to go for meals, just down the street at a boarding house that looked after, and I could have my lunch and evening meal there. Breakfast, I could manage a bit of toast in the quarters. And a lady further down the street that would do my laundry. So it's quite good bachelor living, as it were. And the kind of way we'd have lived in England if you'd left home and going out. So that developed, of course, and we took her out, and then we were both interested in music and so on, and I was interested in the acting and playing at the theatre. because we had a decent theatre in Carlisle where we'd been, and that would be visited by lots of putting on plays and whatever. And we went to one that was in Adelaide in the theatre there. We went down to Adelaide, had dinner, went to the theatre, and then went home again. Of course, it was in her mother's car because she didn't have a car, and of course, I didn't have a car. Working men in England never had cars. Families didn't. And of course, I hadn't had a car here either. But she borrowed her mother's car, and we went down in that and back, and that happened a few times. She'd made a date and away it would go. And of course, that developed to bigger and better friendship. And eventually, we decided that we should marry, and we'd have to get engaged. That's right, and it was late in the year, and Sylvia said, yes, we'll do that. I'll have to get a ring. I said, well, we'll go to Adelaide and I'll find you a ring. So we did that, and she said, no, I'm not going to tell Mum till Christmas time, because she said there'll be a family gathering at Christmas, there always is, and I can tell the whole family at once that we're going to get married, but I'll hide the ring and I won't tell Mum, because she was living with her mother, you see, who was getting elderly at that stage.
That's a wonderful story, Frank. Could you tell us all about your life in the outback of South Australia, and particularly your patrol that you had in the centre, Maralinga, Oodnadatta?
Yes. That was so. And it follows on fairly quickly from that engagement business, because a few weeks after that, and I hadn't told the department anything, of course, a few weeks after that, the sergeant said to me, I had a telephone call from the Deputy Commissioner of Police, and he wants to see you in town on Friday morning. I said, what's it for, Sergeant? What have I done wrong? He said, I don't know anything about it, and he wouldn't tell me. But he said, I told him you couldn't go on Friday because it's court and you're a witness in some cases we have in court. So he couldn't say, well, he said, it'll be Saturday morning then. Tell him to get the train and come down here to my office without fail. Well, I must have something very wrong here. We don't know anything about that. And my sergeant didn't know anything about me doing anything wrong, so it was just impossible. So I went to his office and saw him. Sit down, Frank, we'll have a talk about this. We were having a talk. He said, I'm wondering about whether we could send you somewhere on transfer. And he said, we've done our homework. He said, you're ex-serviceman, you're used to working with services, you're still single, you've got no commitments at all, you do a lot of reading and listening to music, that's part of your hobbies. So to the place I'm thinking of sending you is called so-and-so. And I thought he said a word like Maralinga, not Maralinga, but a word like that, because we had a district in Tanunda, and it had this German name, was part of it. And I said, we don't need a police there, we've got that in our district. No, he said, not this town, come over here to the map. So we walked over to the wall with a big map on the wall. He said, this is where we're talking about, Maralinga, and pointed his finger to a place of nowhere out in the centre. And I said, well, I've never heard of that place. No, he said, no, neither has anybody else. It's still secret. And he then explained me that they had already started building Maralinga, and they'd had a policeman there for about 3 months, and he'd had enough of that. The idea being it was entirely a male place, no women of any sort anywhere in the place, and there wasn't going to be because they weren't building any toilets or ablution blocks for them. And so we sat down and said, oh, well, it sounds all right. What? But he said, if you go there, he said, we're not going to make you go. He said, we'll have to get somebody else. It's such a kind of a place. There's no women there. There's nothing there. People there are working 12 hours a day. You'll have to cover this area. And if you stay for 3 months and you don't want to stay any longer, I'll bring you out and we'll have to put somebody else there. And he said, being no commitments, he said. I said, well, excuse me, sir. I said, I do have some commitments, I said. I've been engaged and my girlfriend was going to announce this at Christmas, at family gathering. He said, oh dear, I didn't know about that. Well, he said, no. Well, I said, nobody knew about it. So that's it. But don't let that stop you, I said, because he said, when are you thinking of getting married? I said, oh, I wouldn't know. I said, I need to save some money. And eventually, I said, I'd have to have a house, get a posting where there's a house I could live in or rent. And he said, oh, well, look, he said, if you stayed for 3 months, we'll bring you out. If you stay for 6 months, we'll bring you out. And he said, if you could stay for 12 months, he said, I would try and put you to the next station where there's a house available for you to live in and rent, and save you having to look around for one. Well, that sounded like a reasonable offer. I said, well, that'll do. I'll go there. Well, he said, seeing you've got this business you're going to announce at Christmas, I was going to have you out there by Christmas, but he said, you'd better announce it all at Christmas. You won't be there for New Year. We'll let you know when you're going. So that was the way I packed up and got a train. And
So you spent 12 months?
I spent the 12 months there. They were thinking, by then the tests were all over, of course, and they had brought some labouring people back to finish some buildings they hadn't quite finished when they had to, all those people were sent out during the test, you see. There was only left with a few odd civilians like me and the postmaster. And there was nobody else there but that. During the test, every person that was registered as being there had to muster before the test. Were all mustered outside. Somebody with the list, and there were 4 different camps, miles apart, but they all had to be mustered. The people that were working, doing the job, of course they were doing that. They were all service people. And you were mustered there until the bonds had been set. There were 4 of those events in between times, and the mustering went on. And during the muster, they were all just in the early afternoon. And the thing about it was that we were mustered with our backs facing where the bomb was being dropped or was placed, and that was about 20 miles away, out in the nothing there. And you were mustered with your back standing to that, and a big lot of us, your back standing to that, and told to close your eyes and put your hands over them as well when the bomb was cut. That was done by time, of course. Well, that happened, and the first thing you saw, despite having your back to that area and your eyes closed and your hands over them, you saw the flash of light that came through. And then you heard the rumble of the explosion, and after that you heard the wind that it blew up. But they'd finished these four, one was dropped from 20,000 feet, another was put on a tower, and they had people out from the area, service people out dressed in uniforms that they thought would keep them coming. They weren't too near, but they were nearer than what the mustard people were. And they also had wartime planes, guns, tanks, all that kind of thing. All military equipment, everything in an area a certain distance from where the bombs, so that they could tell, you could tell what damage it would be doing to all your thing if one was dropped.
Frank, after your term in Maralinga, you were then transferred to what part?
Well, the Deputy Commissioner I thought was very good. He found me a place. He transferred me to Peterborough, where there was a trust home available for a policeman to rent. And there was a sergeant a plainclothesman, and a senior constable, and another 3 constables at Peterborough. Of course, it was a big railway town there, and we worked there from early morning till midnight, and the last people on afternoon shift, somebody took the phone at home.
So, how many years were you a serving officer in the South Australian Police Force?
I finished up with a certificate for a medal from the state government they published for service with the police force, and mine was at a 30-year clasp on it. That was when I retired. A total of 30 years.
30 years, that's quite an achievement.
And I'd lived, my wife and I got married in March of 1957. That was the year after. I could get married before we went to Peterborough. And that was it. I went from Peterborough I went from there to a lot of places. My wife actually worked it out. By the time we got retired and come to live here, that was in 15 years ago now, permanently. So we live here. We'd been in 12 different houses during that service. And of course they were all in different police stations. But a lot of the stations I went to were Whyalla for a while, and I was put into the inspector's office as a clerical part there, and from there I went to Iron Knob, which was a one-man station. Iron Knob would be to Maree. I spent a couple of years or more, 2 or 3 years more there. That was a sergeant's and one-man station. I went from there to Oodnadatta, which was a sergeant and 3-man station. And I stayed there finished up from Maree, and it was over 5 years in those areas.
I think you came to Kangaroo Island in the mid-70s, and you had a shack at Penishaw.
Came over here on weeks, on 3 weeks, part of my leave with Sylvie. She'd never been to the island, and I hadn't been here. And we came over for this holiday and realised when we got here that and we stayed at the old police house at Penishaw. And it wasn't until then I realised that the district clerk there was a Collins, and he was the people that lived and we were friendly with when I went to Iron Knob. He used to work for BHP there. Had left them and taken a store, and he left Iron Knob while I was still there to come to the island to work here as a clerk of this area rather than Kingscote.
In the Queen's Birthday Honours in 1985, you were awarded an Order of Australia medal. Frank, could you outline why you received this medal and what you did to deserve it?
Well, the citation was for service to the community whilst in the South Australian Police Force, and in particular to the Aboriginal community. And that was the service I'd had up in the far north as well. And I just left the job of Police Aboriginal Liaison Officer to go back to a station to finish off my time. I'd gone into Ceduna, which of course was another place with a lot of Aboriginal people, but it was meant mostly for all the work up in the far north where the original Aboriginal people are living, or were living then.
Oh, Frank, it's been a fascinating career. You're a well-respected member of the Penishaw community, and you've had a long association, and we've been very proud of your contribution, and we thank you so much for your interview.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me here. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else.